Right, thank you everybody for attending. Welcome to the Pensions Committee on this 19th of September 2024. Firstly, we'll go to Tom for apologies.
Thank you, Chairman. We have apologies from Tom Hotchin.
Thank you. At this point, I will welcome a new person to our committee, such as Paul Watson there, which is our new independent investment advisor, and Joe will introduce a little bit more about Paul later on. Declarations of members' interest, we know where we are there. I believe there are certain people. Joe, please.
Yeah, I'm an active member.
Thank you. Paul?
Same, growing active member. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve.
A deferred and active member.
Mark? Thank you.
Sorry.
Sorry, Maria.
Yeah, I'm also, I think, a member, though we haven't paid any in for a very long time, or got any out. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. Yep. Thank you. So now we turn to agenda item 3, which is the minutes of the meeting on the 11th of July this year. I won't go through every page, but I'm sure it's something you all read. So those that were at that meeting, if think that's a true reflection of what went on. You want to speak, Mark? Sorry. Well, if we can just vote on that, please, if you're all happy with that. Yep. Thank you. Was there any matters occurring there from that you anybody wants to bring up? No? Okay, I'll sign those minutes as they are then. So next item is agenda item 4, which Joe will bring forward, relating to Paul over there. Joe?
Thank you, Chairman. So this paper just updates the committee on the appointment of the independent investment advisor. It has a recommendation that the committee note the report and welcome Paul Watson as the new independent investment advisor for the Lincolnshire Pension Fund. So following the committee's decision at its June meeting that they would benefit from the advice and support of an independent investment advisor, a recruitment process was undertaken over the summer as set out in the paper. Pleased to say that we had really good interest from a range of excellent candidates, and following interviews, Paul was appointed. So there is some information about Paul's previous roles in paragraph 1.7, but I'd just like to hand over to Paul to ask him to introduce himself to you.
Thank you, Joe, and good morning, everyone. Delighted to have the opportunity to work with you. As you'll see from the report, my background is qualified actuary. But importantly for this role, I spent 20 years as an investment consultant, including 10 years at the Mercer as partner. For the last 5 years, I've been an independent trustee to a number of private sector pension schemes, but also independent investment advisor to Merseyside. So I've got knowledge and experience of the local government pension scheme as well. I'll be attending, obviously, the meetings and adding my thoughts and views to help your consideration. Well, if there's anything you'd like to discuss with me, Joe's got my contact details. You can drop me an email or give me a call. Look forward to working with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul.
That's it. I'll happily take any questions if there are any. Thank you.
It'll probably be later on, but Mark.
Thank you, Chairman. It's no doubt already been part of your discussions anyway with Paul. Could I ask that we do look at the sort of reports that we used to get from the previous independent pension advisor? I don't want to curtail your own way of working by any means at all, Paul, but I did think that the stuff that we used to get from Peter, wasn't it, was very good in terms of giving us the necessary as a starting point before we perhaps raise questions with you. Thank you.
Yeah, if I can just explain, that is in the description of the role that will be done. We've had a lot of discussion with Paul as to what the committee like, what they've had previously, what's been useful. But given that Paul only started with us on the 1st of September and the tight turnaround for committee papers, there wasn't the time this time. So he will be adding his views throughout the meeting, but from the December meeting, which unfortunately he can't make due to a prior engagement before he was appointed, but he will have prepared that paper for the next one, and that will be standard going forward, so you will get back to that. And obviously if there is anything that you think actually it'd be useful to have it in a slightly different way, then you know that feedback is obviously always there for Paul to change things.
Marianne?
Thank you very much. We're in a big time of change, and I would appreciate a report, not urgently, but as when you've got a moment, you know, when you've got some time to put something together, and maybe you've already thinking about it for other organisations and could just tweak something. But we, you know, when you look at the latest from the Office of Budget Responsibility that's come out and how that might impact on local government, for example, as well as on our local economy and where we get money from as well, really appreciate any thoughts on that. Thank you.
Let Joe answer that. Sorry.
If I could just come back, and that isn't really Paul's remit to look at the local government side. This is about the pension fund. So it's more about the global economics, the impacts of that on the assets that we invest in, future kind of expected investment returns, how that geopolitical mix is impacting our investments. But obviously we do still have the report from Hymans, which David will be presenting, which was the kind of the interim report whilst we were discussing whether or not we needed one. But that wouldn't actually be Paul's role to provide that information to the committee.
Okay, thank you. I'd still appreciate something sooner rather than later. Thank you.
Mark?
Thank you, Chairman. To a certain extent, Joe's made some comments that I was going to make about the comment that Councillor Overton made. Perhaps something that might be useful is some sort of comment in your paper for the December committee that refers to the budget that's coming on the 11th of October or whenever it is. That might have some implications for us all.
Thank you. All done on that. I forgot to mention, if we do speak, let's get the microphone close to, because there's one or two that are a little bit hard of hearing, so don't shred it with your laptop or whatever it is, please. Lovely, thank you. So, agenda item 5, which is the responsible investment update report, and that's Claire.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you. The report brings to the committee details of the fund's responsible investment activities during the first quarter of 24-25. And the report has a recommendation that the committee consider the report and discuss the responsible investment activity which has been undertaken during the quarter. Information on engagement and voting activity from LAPF, Border to Coast, Robeco, Legal and General and Morgan Stanley are all included within the report and are supported by a number of appendices and links throughout which provide further information for members of the committee. There's just one area that I'd like to draw your attention to, and that is at paragraph 2.4 on page 21. Representatives from LAPF have been invited to attend the Pensions Committee in December this year and explain a little bit more about the work that they undertake for local authority pension funds, how their engagement themes are selected, and within this, the individual companies that they pick. They'll also cover how they measure success on engagements and provide some examples to the committee on where engagement has been successful and where escalation has been required. This is something which the committee have asked for at a previous meeting. So if there's any further areas that you would like them to address, please let me know. I don't plan on saying anything further about the report, but I'm very happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Claire. I think my only concern going forward really is the issues of it's coming out the greenwashing, you know, which is quite a concern, I would think, to everybody, because you know it's like self-serving yourself, isn't it? You know, it's you issue what you do and what you don't, and people are supposed to take it as said. And as we found out, the airlines were some of the biggest abusers of the information. So I think that is something that officers will, and I would ask officers and through to Border to Coast, that I just, for me, that if you've got a big pension fund and you're going to make decisions, you want the truth, not something that's slightly bent. Anybody else? Sorry, Mark, then Steve. Sorry. Eddie. Yeah.
Thank you, Chairman. As committee will know, I'm heading to Leeds on Thursday to speak on behalf of the committee at the Border to Coast meeting. They are discussing RI activity. It's in section 9 of the Border to Coast agenda. But if there are any questions that committee wish me to ask on the strength of RI activity, please let me know beforehand, and then I'll bring them up at the committee. Thank you, Chairman.
Yeah, thank you. Stephen?
Thank you, Chair. Really echoing what you're saying, I note that there's quite a lot of activity takes place, but what assurance have we got that that activity is really finding out the truth and delving into what we expect as part of our responsibility investments? And I know the word responsibility will mean different things to different people and to different degrees, but in reading it last night and before, I wasn't sure how much of that depth, as you were saying, we were getting there. Was it actually going on the right way or not? And just some more assurance on that would help.
Joan?
Yeah, we're both wanting to jump in here. I think that potentially that will be a really good question to ask as part of the training this afternoon, because we're going to be looking at those opportunities with climate change, and one of the questions can be, how should we be ensuring that we're buying into, our managers are buying into the right stock? What should they be doing to ensure that we're not being greenwashed? And the other thing is, obviously, we've got Border to Coast coming to the December meeting to discuss their equity portfolios. So we can ask them to refer to that within their presentation, but it might, again, also be something that you might want to question as the committee on what they do and how they do those checks.
Okay.
Just very quickly, in that case, would you make sure that we do pre-ask that question to Border to Coast so that they can then present it in their written report as well as a verbal response? Thank you.
Did you have your hand up, Mark? Sorry, Mark, then Paul.
Thank you, Chairman. It just follows on with the two previous comments that we've got. And there was an article, an item in the Border to Coast minutes that you circulated as well, I think, and it's to do with visits to companies to promote our RI, ESG importances. And what I'm not totally sure of is if we go to, for instance, Shell, because I think that was one of the names that was mentioned in the minutes, to talk to them about whether they are doing the sort of things that are important to us properly, or just greenwashing, or are taking into account their international obligations as an international company. How much notice they actually do take of us, because I'm not totally sure what either the Lincolnshire pension fund shareholding proportion is of Shell. I can't imagine it's significant. The Border to Coast proportion of Shell that is owned by Border to Coast or managed by Border to Coast may well be more, but even so, I can't imagine that that's a great proportion. I just wonder how that's, how that sits with the effort that we put in terms of the response we actually get from these companies, and when they have, multi-international obligations and multi-shareholders, probably some of which are far bigger than our shareholding. And that's just an example, I think, when you get into that sort of situation.
Yeah, and that's why we work with LAP, who represents the majority of local government pension schemes in the UK, in England and Wales. That obviously increases the size of the holding, so in terms of speaking to Shell as an organisation, but then from some of the work that LAPF do, they will work with other shareholders, so that's again increasing the size of the voice that's being heard. But you're right, Shell has many, many millions of shares issued, of which some are held by Lincolnshire and by many, many other shareholders. But if the things that LAPF are talking to them about are very similar to the things that they're hearing from other shareholders, then that all adds weight to the message that they're receiving. And LAPF, in their engagement, having very long-term conversations with some of these companies. So they're not speaking to them once and then leaving it. They're holding long-term engagements with them, whether that's meeting with the board, whether that's writing to them about specific issues, whether that's joining other shareholders in voting at their AGM. So it's a whole mix of things. And I think maybe when LAPF come in December, they can talk a little bit more about some of that and how they take an engagement with a company over years to try and work with them to get them to move in that direction. And there are some very good examples of things that they've done which have led to companies changing incrementally over time.
Thank you. I think that's a very useful background information, but perhaps when we do get to discuss this at an opportune time, because I'm not totally sure. It certainly indicates in the paper that I read that Border to Coast go to see Shell. It may well be that other investment partnerships go and talk to, from the local government pension area, go and talk to Shell as well. It may well be that you talk to other big major shareholdings and they go and talk to Shell. It does strike me then that Shell must have a very big section that deals with all these meetings, and presumably they can afford to cover that in terms of cost, although it presumably comes off the bottom line and the returns that we might get. But I still don't. I still wonder how big that voice is, either at the individual level or a group level, or as a working partnership with other people level. So perhaps that could be given to us, because if that moves it from 1% to 5%, it's not going to be significant. If you're talking about 20% of Shell owned by these sort of partner workingship arrangements, that becomes quite useful. But perhaps we could have some idea of sort of what it is, because this is, to a certain extent, the greenwashing issue that's just been raised. If there's numerous people going to talk to Shell, is that simply to keep us happy, or is that to actually listen to us?
Yeah, if I can just come back on that. Absolutely, we can tell you what proportion of Shell Border to Coast hold across their various vehicles. But I think the issue is more all of our investment managers, whether they be Border to Coast, whether it be LGIM, whoever, we require them to engage with companies across all aspects of running a company well, be that across the E, the S or the G. So it's not just, we obviously tell you what Border to Coast do because they are one of our managers, but also in the report we're saying what LGIM have done and what LAPF have done, for example. So we can absolutely give you that, but I think it's more the collective pressure that comes on from all of the investment managers who are generally addressing this in the same way, because everyone wants the shares to go up. So it's got to be well run across the whole thing. It's not just looking at Shell and climate, it will be looking across all of Shell's practices. But Border to Coast are also part of Climate Action 100 and other groups where they do things collaboratively to increase that pressure, because absolutely as a standalone voice, they won't be able to make those changes. So it is about working with all the other voices that are out there, but Border to Coast can still speak far more loudly than Lincolnshire can.
Time. Thank you very much, Joe. That was very, very useful. I would just point out that perhaps the management board of Shell also wants to manage the company very, very well, I would have thought, to ensure that their profits are maintained and their share value keeps on going up. So I'm quite sure, you're probably talking to somebody, to people that are very keen to actually ensure that happens. The question is how much notice they take of us in terms of the ESG and the RI things, because that's presumably built into their management thinking, I would have thought.
Yeah, Thank you, Mark. Did you have your hand up, Paul?
Yeah, I was just going to make a brief comment. Obviously, engagement is a very important part of what we do as asset owners, but I think a really good question for any asset manager and perhaps Border to Coast on Thursday is around when lack of engagement leads to divestment. So engagement is very important, but if we're not getting the kind of message back from the company board, then obviously as asset owners we can divest, and what are the conditions for divestment?
Thank you. Eddie?
Thank you, Chairman. Paul, congratulations on your appointment, first of all. Nice to see you. If you could put that in an email to me, please, I will ask, because I'm inundated by the questions I get from this committee, and it's so easy to miss them. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Eddie. Anybody else? Good chat. Right, we have a recommendation on 19, on page 19, that the committee consider the report and discuss the responsible investment activity undertaken during the quarter. All okay with that? Thank you. So we'll move on to item 6, the annual report on the fund's property and infrastructure investments, and that's Claire again.
Thank you. This report is the annual property and infrastructure covering performance during 23-24, and the report also provides an update on progress reshaping this element of the portfolio. The paper has a recommendation that the committee consider the report on the fund's property and infrastructure holdings and future developments for this element of the portfolio. The main points that I'd like to bring to the committee's attention are that the fund is currently underweight its 10.5% allocation to property. Overall, this has had a positive impact on performance over the last year. Paragraph 1.4 sets out the actions which we're taking to address this underweight position and to rebalance the portfolio to the agreed allocations which are set out at paragraph 1.1. During the last 12 months, the fund has made a commitment to the Border to Coast Global Property Fund of £85 million, and to date we've just received one capital call from them of 11, with the remaining commitment still to be drawn with an estimated time frame of the next 12 to 18 months. The fund will also make a commitment to the Border to Coast UK Property Fund later in the year, and will work with the investment consultant to redeem our existing UK commercial funds and redeploy these into the Border to Coast funds. Border to Coast will also be invited to the committee meeting to present more information on their property offerings at the meeting next April. If we look very briefly at the individual elements within property and infrastructure, overall the UK commercial property funds outperformed their benchmark, although the performance of the underlying managers varied within that. Individual fund performance is set out in the report at paragraph 4.7. Other property, which includes the global and residential property holdings for the fund, underperformed its benchmark significantly, and this is primarily due to a write-down and reshaping of the European Property Growth Fund, which has entered a liquidation phase and will return cash to all shareholders over the next 18 months. And that the two property residential funds that were invested in are relatively new, and it's almost too early to comment on their performance. They're still in the capital deployment phase, and we would expect to see returns grow as that cash is fully deployed and rental income is generated by those underlying properties held. Section 6 of the report provides information on the 5 legacy infrastructure investments that are held by the fund, and all new infrastructure investments that we're making are via Morgan Stanley, who will be at the meeting later. And I'm very happy to take any questions on the report.
Thank you, Claire. Mark?
Thank you, Chairman. Property is something I think that we hadn't had our eyes on for quite a while, because we had invested, and we are looking to invest, I think, more of our portfolio. Do we, and the nature of property, from my understanding, is that it's not that easy to get into to a certain extent, but it's even harder to get out once you're in it. Is there any need to, or any point in reviewing the strategy that we've adopted? in light or because of the changed government that we've now got, and budgets that are will appear, which will no doubt affect market forces, or is it just a question of keeping our fingers crossed and waiting to see what might happen? And as I keep on getting reminded by Joe frequently that we're in this for the long term rather than the short term, and the long term might include a change of government at the end of 5 years certainly, and maybe even sooner, the way this government is going.
Certainly, if you look at paragraph 1.4, particularly in that residential area, we're holding on a search for any further managers in that area just because of that point. So that was agreed by the committee in June 2023 that we would look to add to that area because it's underweight. But at the moment, we're holding on that. I don't know if you want to say something further about property in general, David.
So I think, as Claire said, Councillor, yes, you can set the long-term strategy, but it makes sense to do regular sense checks, whether that trajectory that you're aiming for is right. On the residential, as Claire said, you have taken a pause, so we're aware that there could be political change, so there has been political change, and that could feed through into the prospects and outlooks for that market. So I think quite sensibly you've chosen to take a pause on that. The other thing in terms of, that's been highlighted in terms of property, the challenges of getting money in and out. So the new allocation on the kind of core side with border to coastal build up gradually, as will global. The plans for getting money out of the existing funds is going to be really carefully managed as well. The pooled fund environment in the UK is still a bit fractured, so you've had private sector schemes looking to de-risk and sell out of these pooled funds. It's triggered like big redemption queues, and then adding to that with pooling, you have a lot of LGPS funds thinking there's a new pool solution that I'd like to move into, but I've got funds and fund of funds, and how do I transition from A to B? So I think it's an ongoing process. The officers are carefully managing that. We provided some initial indications as to the funds that you're in at the moment, where you can get out fairly easily and where you might want to take a longer time horizon. So it'll be that continual process of kind of sense checking that the trajectory that you're aiming for is right, and those long-term targets are also right for the fund.
Let Joe pop in and Tom.
Yeah, just to say we are working closely both with Hymans and with Border to Coast, because there are some overlaps with some of the holdings we have in UK commercial that other funds have. So understanding what other funds' redemption plans are, so try and work together to do it in the simplest way. I mean, I think we've been in property since the early 90s, and over the long term, because I like saying that, it has done us very well. But absolutely, there are some areas at the moment that we're just a little cautious on. But if we don't get in some of these redemption queues now, it might then be another 2 years. Some of the queues potentially 2 years long, 12 months, 18 months. So sometimes you have to listen to some of the short-term noise and then make a decision, is it important or is it not? So the residential, absolutely. There's too many unknowns at the moment, so we are waiting on that. The longer-term, global and UK, we have to plan into that, knowing that it's going to be a number of years before we actually get everything out and everything moved across.
Thank you, but we're talking a lot about process, and my concern is the risk associated with it in terms of what might happen with changes taking place at some speed because of the new government and the new government's policies and strategies. The difficulty I see is that it's not easy to react to those changes with any speed at all. We've made decisions and we're almost stuck with them, unless there's a fire sale at some stage or whatever it is, or whatever might come. But I am concerned, that we need to keep our eye on what is happening, because the processes that we normally operate may well not apply in the cases that we're talking about over the life of this government, perhaps.
Thank you, Mark. Tom?
Thank you, Chairman. 3 questions, if I may. How much pension fund capital is in, and your apologies for my pronunciation, Chairman, ARBDEM, which is the European Property Growth Fund, and are those sums of money at risk of not being returned? As I note in the report, there is a rather large queue to get the money out of said fund. As Mark's already alluded to, Councillor Allen, secondly, is there any risk around property investments due to the current government? Because I certainly think there is. And thirdly, have we reassessed our pension fund interest in, shall I say, commercial property? And in the sense, what I mean by commercial property, Chairman, is office space, because we can see here for ourselves, we are reducing our office estate at quite a whack. And the private sector, if we are in the public sector, the private sector will be doing it harder and faster to save money. So have we actually, since the pandemic, reviewed that and actually reassessed that? Because actually the amount of office space that's being used is lessening because more and more people are working from home. They don't need as bigger office space. And I'm very conscious we could be setting ourselves up for a rather large thud if we haven't sort of reassessed that, because that's certainly in this country, Chairman, I don't know so much about Europe and the wider world, but certainly in this country, the viability of commercial office space seems to be going through the floor at the moment and has done for the last few years, even before COVID, and COVID's merely accelerated that. So I'd be very interested to know if we'd actually reassessed our interest in commercial office space in the UK. Thank you, Chairman.
Yeah, good point, Tom.
So,
Claire, want to add to that?
hopefully we'll cover all of those questions. Please tell us if we don't pick up on everything. In terms of the Aberdeen European Property Growth Fund, it has a value of just under £50 million at the 31st of March this year. But remember, we're a fund which holds £3.3 billion worth of assets. So in terms of our portfolio, it's a relatively small element of that. We receive monthly valuations on that and then market valuations. So it's already carrying in it the value that it should be worth to us. But until something sells, then you're never entirely sure what that will be. In terms of office accommodation, we're in 3, which was for the Aviva Fund the UK Commercial Property Fund has closed and been returning cash to us over the last few years. Has a split between office accommodation, retail, industrial and other types of assets. The report at paragraph 1.5 shows the split of the funds that we're in versus the universe of those of assets. So actually our holding of offices is below that universe. So we've got 14.5% versus 20% as the average in that. If you look through the report, you'll see that a number of those UK commercial funds that we're in have been looking at restructuring the assets that they hold. So they're doing a lot of work to make sure that they're future-proofed. But as you've said, it takes a long time to rejig, to dispose of and buy new assets, but they are acutely aware of what the market is like and are making those efforts to restructure their portfolios to make sure that they're future-proofed and appropriate going forwards for investors.
Can I just add just something onto the end of that, exactly as Claire said? And I think one of the examples in case is the, and we call it Aberdeen, they just seem to take a lot of the vowels out. So it was the Standard Life Fund. We took quite a hit on performance over the last few years as they were restructuring their portfolio. So a lot of the managers now are putting much more into the distribution sectors, so the big warehouses, because things like Amazon and all the others where we're doing our online shopping. So that's kind of a growth area, and also the alternative. So things like healthcare, student accommodation, etc. So our managers are obviously, you know, they're on the ground, they know what's happening, and they should be forward planning. Say Standard Aberdeen have done that. We took the hit, and that performance has been improving now that they've realigned their portfolio. The only other thing I was going to say on the risk with property with the current government, absolutely, there's a lot of unknowns out there. All I can say on that is that we work very closely with our investment consultant with Border to Coast, and we work with our property managers that we have currently to understand how they see those risks, what they're doing to address those. But that's really all we can do, because as Councillor Allen said, it isn't something you can just get out of tomorrow or get into tomorrow. So it is sometimes playing that long game, but just understanding all those risks as they come up and trying to to manage the investments as much as our managers are able to, and just us being informed so we can inform yourselves.
Thank you for that. The only other question, and it's popped up through your reply to my original question, is have we looked potentially at moving more away from the traditional side that we would invest in, which is shopping sort of areas, certainly UK-wise, and say commercial, let's more into industrial, because that's one thing people are always going to need, Chairman. They're always going to need industrial units, because that's not something you can do in the back of your own house. It's not something you can set up from home and work from home. It's not something, say, outside of warehouses, which, for obvious reasons around Amazon and other companies, seem to be forever expanding. But they will always need industrial units, and I know the previous government, I can't speak for this one, but it was something they wanted to encourage and support. So whether that's something the current government will do, I don't know, because it's, shall I say, assisting UK PLC, for want of a better term, which I know we were sort of semi-obligated to do, or being in the process of being obligated to do anyway. So we're sort of killing two birds with one stone, and if we do it correctly, Chairman, we could make good return on investment for our pensioners and the fund. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Tom. I think you're right what you say. I think if you wanted to formulate a question for Eddie, for Border to Coast as well, just a general on the way they think they're steering as well, then do so. I think it's a good point, and it's something to follow. But I'm sure you know, with benchmarks and not achieving, the officers are well aware, and we rely on them. If there's big red light showing, you'll be onto it. Claire.
I just wanted to very briefly say, obviously, as we move into the Border to Coast products, we have more say with them about their direction. But in terms of their UK portfolio that we will make a commitment to, they're buying direct properties. So they haven't got the legacy hangover of assets which the funds that we're currently invested in do. And they will be able to look at the market as it is and how they believe it's going to develop when they're picking those assets for us in the future.
All done? Thank you. So we've got a recommendation there on page 83, which is the committee consider report of the fund's property and infrastructure holdings and future developments for this element of the portfolio. All happy we've had a good shot at that? Thank you. So right now we'll have an ask to go into a closed session, so I'll just read out that section to make sure we're all clear on that. It's consideration of exempt information in accordance with the section 100A 94 of the Local Government Act 1972. The following agenda items have been circulated to the press and public, have not been circulated to the press and public on the grounds that they are considered to contain exempt information as defined in paragraph 3 of part 1 of schedule 12A of the Local Government Act 1972 as amended. The press and public may be excluded from the meeting for the consideration of these items of business. So can we just take a vote that that's fine by everybody, please? Yeah, that's conclusive then, Thomas, thank you.